She sold everything she had for it, a single dilapidated house standing skeletal against the vast, unforgiving plains of the American West. It was a place marked by tragedy, abandoned by all, a place where the whispers in the nearest town claimed the very ground it stood on breathed. With a leg that dragged from a mining accident years ago, 5 children whose bellies were perpetually empty, and a fear that clung to her like a shroud even in the brightest daylight, she gambled her last few dollars on this ruin. This was Eleanor, a widow in the harsh year of 1890. No family, no help, no future. She thought the ruin would be her last hope. But as her worn boots stepped onto the raw, rotting living room floor, she felt a strange, deep vibration, as if something buried in the earth below was humming her name. It looked like nothing more than rotten wood and sun-bleached adobe, but it hid a secret buried for decades, waiting for someone desperate enough to listen. What this woman found beneath her feet will not just chill you, it will follow you into your dreams. The March sun was high and cruel when Eleanor climbed down from the rickety wagon, the dust of the Nevada trail instantly clinging to the frayed black wool of her morning dress. It was a garment she now wore like a second skin, a constant reminder of all she had lost. At her feet, a single cloth-bound bundle held the entirety of their worldly possessions. Clinging to her skirts, her 5 children watched her, their faces smudged with dirt and fear, waiting for a command she didn't know how to give. Matthew, at 12, tall for his age but frighteningly thin, tried to stifle a dry, rattling cough that seemed to shake his entire frame. The sound was fragile, swallowed by the immense, silent landscape. The 8-year-old twins, Lucy and Anna, stared at the house with identical, oversized eyes that mirrored the raw terror Eleanor fought so hard to conceal. 5-year-old Daniel, his thumb jammed in his mouth, and baby Rose, a swaddled lump asleep in a shawl slung across Eleanor's chest, completed the portrait of her utter desolation. This wasn't a new beginning. It was the final act of a long, drawn-out humiliation. It had all started 6 months ago with the deep, muffled boom of dynamite from the silver mine, a sound that was followed by a crushing, unnatural silence. Her husband, Richard, a man whose laugh had been as loud and strong as the mountains, was buried under tons of rock. With him, all their hopes were entombed. Her brother-in-law, Martin, a man whose heart was as cold and hard as the ore he coveted, appeared soon after. He didn't bring words of comfort or offers of help. He brought Mr. Thorncroft, a lawyer with a vulture's smile and the stale, lingering scent of cheap tobacco. "Eleanor, what we're offering is an act of charity," Thorncroft had purred, his long, yellowed fingers drumming on the stack of papers that would legally steal her inheritance. "No one would give you $100 for that worthless pile of rocks you call your share of the ranch. But my client, Mr. Martin, is a generous man." Martin's generosity was priced at a paltry $500. It was a blatant insult, daylight robbery, but she was a widow in 1890, a woman with no standing, no rights, no one to fight for her. She signed the papers, feeling the nib of the pen scratch away not just her future, but her very dignity. With that blood money, stained by betrayal, the only thing she could afford was this ruin. The Sigh, they called it in the nearest town, a name spoken in hushed tones, often followed by the sign of the cross. It was an abandoned homestead, a 3-day ride away, a place they said was haunted by the ghosts of its failed inhabitants, cursed by the land itself. The wagon driver, a taciturn man with a sun-cured face, had unloaded their single bundle without a word, took his payment, and turned his wagon with a haste that chilled the blood. He wanted to be long gone before the sun dipped below the horizon. Now they were utterly alone, facing the house that stared back like a sun-bleached skeleton. The adobe walls were deeply cracked, like an old man's skin. The roof had lost more shingles than it kept, resembling a gapped, broken-toothed grin. The windows were empty sockets that seemed to weep dust. Eleanor took a deep breath, the dry air burning her lungs, and pushed the heavy wooden door. The shriek it made was a high-pitched, agonizing lament that sent the children recoiling. The smell hit her first, a physical blow. It wasn't the clean, honest scent of dry dust or old timber. It was a dense, cloying odor of perpetually damp earth, of fermented mud, and something ancient and metallic. as if rust and mold had spawned together for generations in the suffocating darkness. Matthew, trying to be brave for his siblings, stepped inside first but stopped dead in his tracks. The floor of the main room wasn't packed earth, as was common, but wide wooden planks, an unusual luxury for such a humble home. But the boards were a sickly gray, rotting at the edges, and the putrid, earthy smell rose directly from them, as if the floor was just a thin, fragile lid over a damp, waiting sepulcher. Eleanor placed her palm on the rough planks and felt it again. Not just the clammy cold of dead wood, but that almost imperceptible, rhythmic vibration. "Mama, I'm cold," Matthew whispered, his cough returning, deeper and wetter this time. The house was freezing, a deep, penetrating cold that had nothing to do with the March air outside. That first night was a new circle of hell. The wind didn't howl around the house. It seemed to be born from beneath the floorboards, a mournful moan that vibrated up through their bones. Eleanor had settled the 5 children on a single pile of blankets in the absolute center of the room, as far as possible from the walls that wept a strange dark moisture. She stayed awake, her back pressed against the opposite wall, a useless kitchen knife in her lap, listening to the house's symphony of decay. The wood creaked, the roof groaned, but those were the normal sounds of a dying house. What she heard later was not. It was a scratch, a long, tense silence. And then again, scourge. It wasn't a rat. The sound was too heavy, too deliberate, too rhythmic. It sounded like a heavy wooden box or a large stone being dragged across a rough surface, just beneath her feet. She shot up, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. The sound stopped instantly, as if it had been waiting for her to react, as if it knew she was listening. The next morning, the harsh light of dawn brought no relief, only a clearer picture of her catastrophic mistake. The well was nearly dry, yielding only bucket after bucket of a thick, sludgy mud that reeked of sulfur. It was dead water. They couldn't drink it. The small cask of clean water they'd brought was almost gone. True panic, cold and sharp, began to crawl up her spine. This wasn't just a sale. It had been a death sentence. Martin hadn't just cheated her. He had exiled her to this hellscape so she and her children would quietly fade away, consumed by thirst and sickness, far from any prying eyes. Matthew's cough was getting worse. The dampness from the floor had materialized overnight into a visible, greasy mist that clung to everything. It had settled deep in his lungs, and his breathing was now a painful, high-pitched whistle. Despair tasted like bile in the back of her throat. That afternoon, while trying to pry up one of the loosest floorboards, her frustration and grief finally boiled over. It was in the darkest corner of the room where the smell was most potent and where she'd heard the scratching. The wood was soft, almost spongy to the touch. She hammered it with her clenched fist again and again in a fit of helpless, silent rage. "Damn you, Martin! Damn this godforsaken house!" And then the wood gave way. It didn't just splinter. It broke cleanly under her fist, falling not onto solid earth, but into a hollow, empty space. Eleanor recoiled, her anger instantly replaced by a deep, paralyzing fear. She peered into the darkness with the flickering stump of a candle she could ill afford to burn. The floor hit a cellar that wasn't in any description, a black, gaping hole that smelled of confinement, rusted metal, and long-held secrets. "Mama, don't go down," Matthew whispered, his voice hoarse from the incessant coughing. He stood in the doorway, his small face a mask of terror. Eleanor turned to him, her shadow thrown by the candle dancing like a frantic ghost on the wall. "I have to. Watch your brothers and sisters. Don't let them come near this." The air rising from the cellar was cold, but strangely, it was bone dry, a stark contrast to the oppressive dampness above. There were no stairs, just crude stone steps carved directly into the earth itself. Her heart pounding against her ribs, she began her descent into the unknown. The cellar was small, with solid stone walls. It was impeccably, unnaturally dry. It was as if this secret room was a lung, inhaling all the life-draining moisture from the house above and breathing it out into their living space, slowly poisoning them. Then, the wavering candlelight fell on the object in the center of the room. A trunk. It was made of dark, heavy wood, bound with rusted iron straps. It was a quality piece, utterly out of place in such a ruin. She knelt before it. The lock was large but unfastened. With both hands, she pulled on the heavy latch. It gave way with a dull, satisfying crunch. She lifted the heavy lid, and the hinges groaned, a long, sharp cry that seemed to travel up through the very foundations of the house. The smell that escaped wasn't of rot or death. It was the dry, sweet scent of old paper and well-cured leather. Her heart, which had hoped for gold or jewels, sank for a moment. The candlelight revealed the contents, accounting ledgers, dozens of them bound in thick leather, perfectly and unnaturally arranged. Who would hide account books in a secret cellar? Beneath the books, her hand touched something cold and smooth. A tin box. It wasn't rusted. The dry air of the cellar had preserved it perfectly. Inside was a thick stack of old bills, tied with a faded blue silk ribbon. It wasn't a fortune, maybe $100, but it was more money than she'd seen in years. Enough for real food, enough to get Matthew to a doctor. Tears of overwhelming relief burned her eyes. Beneath the money was a single folded envelope. Written on the front in a firm, elegant hand were the words, "To the one who has the courage to listen to the ground." A profound chill ran down her spine. The house had called her, the ground had spoken to her, and she had answered. The scratching hadn't been a threat, it was an invitation. She sat on the dry earth and unfolded the letter. It was dated 1870. "My name is Beatrice," it began, "and this house is my witness." The letter spoke not of ghosts or curses, but of business, silver, and a bitter betrayal. Beatrice and her younger brother Roderick had discovered a rich vein of silver while digging the well. This house was a facade for a small, secret mining operation. They had built a cellar and a tunnel to process the ore and smuggle it out unseen. The scratching Eleanor heard, Beatrice wrote, was likely the wind echoing in the mouth of that long-forgotten tunnel. The betrayal had been swift and brutal. Roderick, consumed by a sudden, violent greed, had tricked her into signing papers that gave him full legal rights to the mine. Once in control, he stole all the processed silver and fled, leaving her with nothing but debts in a dry well. To ensure no one else discovered his secret, he himself had spread the rumor that the house was haunted. Beatrice died a year later, alone and heartbroken, from pneumonia, in the very house Eleanor now fought to survive in. As Eleanor finished the letter, she heard it again. Scourge. But this time, from below the floor, the sound was different. It came from the far stone wall of the cellar. She remembered Beatrice's words, the wind echoing in the mouth of the tunnel. "Mama, what was that?" Matthew's voice made her jump. He was halfway down the dirt steps, pale as a ghost, a heavy iron fireplace poker, trembling in his small hand. Seeing him there, so frail but so determined to protect her, erased the last vestiges of Eleanor's fear. She was no longer scared. She was incandescent with rage. Together, mother and son examined the far wall. "Here," Matthew whispered, his small fingers brushing against the base. A section of the wall wasn't carved stone, but adobe, skillfully textured and blackened to look like rock. A false door. Eleanor took the heavy poker from her son. Jamming the sharp tip into a thin crack, she used it as a lever, pushing with all her might, fueled by a desperate, burning rage and the image of Martin laughing on his sprawling ranch. There was a deep, grinding sound. Scurch! The adobe patch didn't open, it pivoted on a central axis. The scratching wasn't the wind, or an animal, or a ghost. It was the sound of the house's own secret, groaning mechanism. The door swung inward, revealing a rectangle of absolute consuming darkness. A blast of cold, metallic air rushed out, carrying the raw, electric scent of silver and deep earth. It was so strong it extinguished her candle, plunging them into total, disorienting blackness. "Mama," Matthew whimpered, his small hand finding hers in the dark. "Quiet, son. I have matches." Her fingers trembled as she struck a match. The flame flickered back to life, illuminating a low, narrow passageway supported by old, rotting wooden beams. She didn't have to go in. Holding the candle high, she peered into the tunnel's entrance. The light caught a dull, heavy gleam, half hidden under a pile of rotted planks on the tunnel floor. She knelt and used the poker to push the decaying wood aside. Lying on the dry earth were ingots, Pure silver ingots, darkened with tarnish. Solid. Heavy. She counted 5 of them, each as heavy as a newborn child. Roderick, in his greed and haste, had taken the easy prize, the kihash, the processed silver, and left the raw, heavy, incriminating ore behind. This was what Beatrice had managed to save. This was what the ground had been guarding for 20 years. The $100 would buy a doctor. The silver would buy her revenge. Her plan was immediate, born of terror and a newfound ferocious hope. She had to get to town. Now, she left the terrified twins in charge, a heavy, unfair burden for 2 8-year-olds. Bar the door. Don't open it for anyone. Kissing each of her sleeping and waking children, she heaved the feverish Matthew onto her back and set off into the vast, dark night. This wasn't a retreat. Every painful step she took away from the cursed house was a step toward a war she now intended to win. She arrived in town at dawn, a specter covered in dust, her feet bleeding, her shoulders raw. She marched straight to the doctor's office. Dr. Fuentes was a man with a skeptical, dismissive gaze. "It's my son," Eleanor said, her voice a ragged croak as she lowered Matthew to the floor. "He's sick. He needs medicine." The doctor glanced at the boy's shallow breathing. "Ma'am, pneumonia this bad is a matter for the preacher, not me." "I'll pay you," Eleanor said, her voice suddenly hard. He scoffed. "With what?" She reached into her blouse and pulled out the thick stack of old bills, slapping them down hard on his polished desk. The sharp sound silenced his derision. The doctor's disdain evaporated, replaced by a keen professional interest that only money can buy. He examined Matthew. "It's severe," he declared, his eyes now fixed on the cash. "The treatment will be expensive." "I didn't ask the price," Eleanor replied, her voice dangerously firm. "I told you to save my son." She paid the exorbitant sum he demanded without flinching. She rented a small, clean room at the inn, and for 2 days and 2 nights, she held a terrifying vigil, forcing medicine and water between Matthew's pale lips, cooling his feverish brow with damp cloths. On the 3rd day, his fever broke. Leaving the sleeping boy with the innkeeper, Eleanor walked out into the hostile town. The remaining money was a weapon. She went to the general store and bought not just a small bag of flour, but sacks of it. Beans, lard, dried meat, potatoes. She bought lamp oil, soap, and 2 large new water barrels. The town watched. The same people who saw her arrive like a dusty, half-dead ghost now saw her leaving the store with 2 local boys helping her carry her mountain of purchases. The whispers followed her like flies. Where did the widow get that kind of money? Didn't Martin leave her with absolutely nothing? As she left the hardware store with a new pickaxe and shovel, she ran right into him. Mr. Thorncroft, the vulture, his eyes small and greedy, darted from her face to the pile of supplies. "Eleanor, what a surprise. I thought you were enjoying your new property at the Psy." "I was," she said calmly, her voice even. "And I'm going back. Excuse me, sir." She walked past him, her dusty skirt brushing against his expensive suit, feeling his calculating eyes burning into her back. The game had begun. She bought a stubborn old donkey, loaded it with her supplies, put a recovering Matthew on top, and left the stunned town at dusk. She was no longer a victim fleeing into the wilderness. She was the mistress of the Psy, returning to her fortress, to her children, and to the 5 silver ingots waiting patiently for her in the dark. When she arrived back at the house, she found her children safe, though pale with fear. In the following days, the house was transformed from a tomb into a home. Matthew grew stronger with every bowl of thick stew. They dug a trench to divert the seeping dampness and, after days of back-breaking labor, cleaned the well until the water ran clearer. At night, by the warm, steady glow of a new oil lamp, Eleanor devoured Beatrice's ledgers. They were more than numbers. They were a meticulously detailed map of the corruption that had built the region's wealth. And one name appeared again and again, a thread of poison running through the years. Thorncroft and Thorncroft, attorneys at law. The lawyer's own father had been Roderick's willing accomplice. Her dispossession wasn't an accident. It was the deliberate, cruel echo of an older crime. She knew with chilling certainty that they would be back. 10 days later, Two fine horses kicked up a cloud of dust on the trail. Martin and Thorncroft had arrived. Inside now, Eleanor commanded her children. She stepped out onto the porch, her gaze level and hard as flint. "Eleanor, my dear sister-in-law," Martin boomed, with a sickeningly false kindness. "I heard you had a remarkable stroke of luck." "Mr. Thorncroft," Eleanor said, her voice as cold as the cellar below. "No one was concerned when my son was dying. But now that I can afford to buy flour, your concern is so very timely." Martin, impatient with pleasantries, stepped forward, his shadow falling over her. "Enough of this. We know you found money on this property. By law, that money belongs to me. I've come for what is mine." Eleanor almost smiled, a grim, terrifying sight on her weary face. "The money is gone, gentlemen, spent on medicine and beans. But I did find something else, something much more valuable to a man of the law like Mr. Thorncroft." She saw the lawyer stiffen in his saddle. "I found some old account books from 1870. They tell a fascinating story about a woman named Beatrice, her brother Roderick, a secret silver mine, and a very helpful law firm called Thorncroft and Thorncroft." The blood drained from Thorncroft's face, leaving it a pasty, sickly white. "Let's go, Martin," he hissed, his carefully constructed composure shattered into 1,000 pieces. "This woman is insane." They fled, not from her, but from the ghost of Beatrice, a ghost she had resurrected from paper and ink. The battle was over, but the war had just begun. That night, under the cold light of the moon, Eleanor and Matthew moved the silver. They dug a deep hole beneath the hearth in the main room, burying 4 of the heavy ingots where they would cook their food, hiding the cold, dead metal under the living symbol of life and home. Her next move was audacious. She took her children to the church in the nearby town, paying the stunned priest a handsome sum to give them sanctuary and protection in the adjoining convent. Then, with the smallest of the silver ingots hidden deep in a sack of corn, she journeyed not to the local town, but north, for 4 long days, to the bustling, chaotic silver city of Zacatecas. There, she was just another anonymous prospector. She found an assayer in a dusty back alley, haggled like a veteran, and walked out not with silver, but with a bank draft for what was, to her, a small fortune. From there, she went directly to the state capitol. She didn't seek out the biggest, most ostentatious law firm. She found Elias Vance, a young, hungry, incorruptible lawyer known for his willingness to take on the powerful and corrupt. She laid Beatrice's damning books on his cluttered desk. As he read, his initial skepticism turned to wide-eyed shock. "Ma'am," he said, his voice a reverent whisper, "this is more than just proof that the house is yours. This is proof that the Thorncroft fortune and Martin's entire ranch is built upon a foundation of fraud and theft." But Martin and Thorncroft had not been idle. They had men watching the convent, a silent, menacing threat. And they had sent other men, not lawyers this time, but hired guns, to the house. They were ordered to find the books and the silver, and to burn the place to the ground if necessary. With the troublesome widow inside, a frantic rider brought the news to Vance's office. "We have to go back, now," Vance said, his face grim. They returned not alone, but with 2 armed federal marshals. As they approached the house at sunset, the air was thick with a deadly tension. They were inside. "They're in there," Eleanor whispered. A shot rang out from a darkened window, splintering the carriage wood just inches from her head. As a furious gunfight erupted, the marshals taking cover and returning fire, Eleanor's mind raced. The house had another door. The tunnel. While the gunfight raged, a chaotic symphony of bullets and shouting, she slipped away unnoticed, finding the tunnel's hidden entrance on a nearby slope. She crawled through the suffocating, silent darkness, the sounds of the battle above muffled and distant. She emerged from the floor in the main room, rising from the ground like a vengeful ghost directly behind the 2 astonished gunmen as they fired out the windows. They spun around, their faces masks of pure disbelief and terror. Before they could react, the marshals, seeing the tide turn, burst through the front door. The fight was over in an instant. The captured gunmen, unnerved by her spectral appearance, confessed everything. With their testimony, the damning ledgers, and the 4 silver ingots Eleanor calmly dug up from beneath her own hearth in front of the stunned marshals, The case against her enemies was airtight. Telemontes was ruined, his family's long-hidden legacy of theft and deceit exposed to the world. Martin lost the ranch his family had stolen decades before. Eleanor and her children never lived in the Psy again. They moved into the grand ranch house that was rightfully theirs, a house with cool tiled floors and courtyards overflowing with vibrant flowers. Matthew was sent to the best schools in the East to heal his damaged lungs. The twins had a garden to play in. Her family finally had a future. A year later, Eleanor returned to the old, abandoned house one last time. It was quiet, a silent, weathered monument to the impossible battle she had won. She walked to the cellar and took the fifth and final ingot, the one she had purposefully left behind. She carried it upstairs and placed it in the center of the main room, a final payment to Beatrice, the woman whose voice from the past had armed her for war. As she closed the door for the last time, she heard a soft, final sound from within. Scourge. It was not a lament. It was the house thanking her. Its story finally told. Its long, tormented spirit finally at peace. Have you ever heard a story like this in the place where you live? Tell me about it in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to Broken Rings.